Today we're diving into the animated series Invincible, a story about how the most powerful defender on Earth gradually becomes its greatest threat. The story kicks off with an attack. Two armored twins known as the Maulers storm the White House, their sole objective being the elimination of the president. One of them is a clone of the other, since both are geniuses in genetic engineering who have experimented even on themselves. Earth's own version of the Justice League, the Guardians of the Globe, is immediately dispatched to respond. Leading the team is the Immortal. He has lived for about 1,000 years, and, within this universe's canon, even served as President Abraham Lincoln. The squad also includes War Woman, a Wonder Woman analog with a massive weapon, Darkwing, essentially a Russian version of the Flash, the Martian Man, a shape-shifting alien from Mars, and Green Ghost, who can turn herself intangible. Standing apart is a mustachioed powerhouse called Omni-Man, also known as Nolan Grayson. Officially not part of the Guardians, preferring to work alone, yet the most powerful hero on the planet, originally from another star system entirely. Following the battle at the White House, the heroes first evacuate civilians to safety, then go all out, neutralize the Maulers, and send them to a specialized prison beneath the Pentagon. After that, we're introduced to the everyday life of the main hero, Mark Grayson. On the surface, he's just a regular teenager and comic book fan, but at home, he's the son of Omni-Man himself and his wife, Debbie. When Nolan returns home after dealing with the Maulers, a topic comes up over dinner that worries both parents. Despite his age, Mark still hasn't manifested the Viltrumite abilities his father possesses. They're anxious because Mark is half-human, which means there's a real chance his powers may never awaken at all. The next day, Mark heads to school as if nothing unusual is happening. From their conversation, it becomes clear that nobody around him has any idea who his father really is. To everyone, he's just an ordinary teenager. At school, Mark notices a local bully pushing around a girl, and, despite knowing full well how it might end, tries to stand up for her. He predictably takes a punch to the face, and it's ultimately Amber who saves the situation. She shuts the conflict down cold and makes it clear she's not someone to mess with. Later, she separately thanks Mark for trying to protect her, even at the cost of his own face. That evening, Mark goes to his shift at a local fast food place, and that's when everything changes. While tossing out trash, his powers finally wake up. In a burst of emotion, he hurls a garbage bag practically into orbit. Shaken, he comes home and over dinner tells his parents that he's no longer just a regular human. His father's reaction is cold at first, as if Nolan wasn't ready to hear this news right now. But Debbie gives him a nudge, and Nolan does finally congratulate his son, promising to begin proper training the very next day. That night, Mark recalls the moment when his father first told him the truth. Omni-Man isn't an Earth-born superhero, but a native of the planet Viltrum. The planet resembles Earth in many ways, but is populated by Viltrumites, outwardly human, yet with colossal strength and the ability to fly. A brutal selection process governs their society. The weak are discarded, the strong rise. Viltrumites who reach maturity scatter across the galaxy to help other civilizations. Nolan volunteered to become Earth's protector, met Debbie here, and that's how Mark came to be, inheriting a portion of Viltrumite blood. Realizing that his powers are on the verge of emerging, Mark goes up to the roof at night to run an experiment. Can he actually get off the ground? The attempt turns into chaos. He gets thrown in every direction, nearly clips a plane, gets flung almost beyond the atmosphere, and at some point loses consciousness. Nevertheless, on some kind of unconscious autopilot, he manages to return and crash land near his house. The next morning, sleep-deprived and beaten up, he still shows up for the promised training session with his father. Nolan starts with the basics: proper takeoff, speed control, safe landing. Then he moves on to combat drills and drives home in a very painful way that enemies won't play by the rules or spare him. Mark can barely survive a single one of his father's hits, which takes a serious toll on his confidence. Nolan later admits to Debbie that Mark's powers surfacing right now has thrown off his entire plan. He wasn't ready for his son to suddenly become a full participant in the big game. At school, the bully tries to humiliate Mark again, but this time things go differently. The reinforced body shrugs off the punch, and the aggressor ends up looking foolish in front of everyone. Inside Mark, against the backdrop of everything that's happened, anger and the desire to finally stop being a victim begin to build. To release the built-up tension, Mark decides to go into the field as a hero for the first time. He cobbles together a primitive homemade costume, pulls on a mask, and flies out at night to patrol the city, looking for criminals. He very quickly runs into Titan, a stone-skinned bruiser working for a local crime boss, and his crew. In the fight that breaks out, Mark, acting impulsively, manages to crack Titan's stone armor and take down the opposition, but does it clumsily, breaking building facades, collapsing structures, and causing a ton of collateral damage. All the while, Omni-Man has been watching this improvised debut. Back home, he harshly scolds his son for recklessness and lack of a plan. But Mark takes the criticism as a lack of trust and tries to prove he's ready for real threats and that it's time to stop treating him like a child. Instead of continuing the argument, Nolan takes Mark to a friend of his, a talented costume designer named Art. This craftsman makes suits for superheroes, tailoring the design to their abilities and persona. Since Mark still hasn't come up with a proper superhero name, Art gives him a task. First, settle on a name and aesthetic, then come back for a real costume. Back home, Mark tries to train in the yard, but what unfolds instead is a heartfelt conversation with his mom. Debbie notices that her son is starting to get a big head and is already comparing himself to his father. She explains, gently but firmly, his goal isn't to become a copy of Omni-Man, but to grow into the best version of himself. Those words stick with him more than any of his father's punches. Later, Nolan takes Mark on a kind of training therapy session. They play baseball using super speed and flight, literally launching the ball around the world. During this game, his father shows Mark that being a hero isn't only about the force of your hits, but also about resilience, the ability to take life's blows and not lose heart. For other teenagers, baseball is just a game, but Mark, with his abilities, is obligated to see the world on a bigger scale. Having absorbed that, he fully forms his new identity and chooses a name for himself, Invincible. For him, the name carries not just physical power, but the inner toughness he's striving toward. With his new name, he goes back to Art and states his alias. The tailor fashions him a bright, recognizable costume that later becomes the hero's signature look. Soon, already in his new outfit, Mark spots explosions in the city and decides to intervene, jumping into a fight with a minor villain. In a parallel storyline, the Guardians receive an emergency signal from their headquarters, assemble there in full, and discover that none of them triggered the alarm. It's a trap. Instead of a team briefing, Omni-Man is waiting for them. Nolan attacks the Guardians without warning. Everything happens so fast and so brutally that many of them don't even get a chance to understand what's going on. Red Rush is the first to charge, unleashing a series of super fast strikes, but it isn't enough. Omni-Man seizes the initiative and literally destroys him. He tears the Martian apart, snaps War Woman's neck, decapitates Aquarius, and ultimately caves in the Immortal's chest and beheads him. Despite his monstrous power, Nolan himself takes serious damage, and by the end of the massacre, collapses unconscious among the bodies of his former colleagues. The reason for the slaughter remains unclear. No villain monologue, no explanations, just blood and shock. The Global Defense Agency, led by Cecil Stedman, arrives at the scene later. They find the headquarters splattered with the blood of legendary heroes and a barely alive Omni-Man. The Guardians' bodies are evacuated in the strictest secrecy, since revealing the truth at this moment would mean worldwide chaos. Meanwhile, Debbie at home begins to worry about her husband's absence. To keep from losing her mind, she mechanically brews coffee, makes breakfast, tries to hold on to the routine of daily life, but the anxiety inside only grows. When Debbie is about to go searching for her husband, a group of agents from the intelligence service appears at the door. She and Mark are taken to a classified facility where they're shown Nolan for the first time, lying hooked up to machines. Cecil explains that Omni-Man was found unconscious at the scene of the Guardians' murders, and the agency is doing everything possible to stabilize his condition. The true picture of what happened at the headquarters is kept from the family. For the official version, a hypothesis is offered. An unknown and powerful enemy attacked the team, and Omni-Man barely survived. While Debbie stays by her husband's side, Mark receives a signal about a new threat downtown and, without hesitation, flies there in his invincible costume. He runs into another invasion. Extraterrestrials, the Flaxans, have arrived to conquer the Earth. In his very first clash, Mark accidentally wounds their leader, but quickly realizes he has no way of controlling the flow of events. He tries to save people, haul the wounded out from under rubble, but the scale of the destruction overwhelms him. At a certain point, he literally freezes. He can't figure out who to grab first and who he's already too late to save. The situation is steadied by the arrival of the teen team, a young hero squad. Standing out among them is Adam Eve, who can alter the structure of matter and reshape objects at will. She quickly takes charge, redirects Mark toward evacuating specific people while holding the front line herself alongside the others. At her request, Mark carries an elderly woman out of the epicenter and hands her off to medics, who later transport her to the Pentagon. In the thick of battle, the viewer is also introduced to the rest of the team. Hot-headed Rexplode, who can turn any small object into an explosive. Duplicate, who can fill a room with copies of herself. And the cold, calculating Robot, who coordinates the team's actions. Despite everyone's efforts, the battle goes badly, and it seems seems the team won't hold out. But suddenly, the aliens begin rapidly aging and literally crumbling. Their technology fails, and the remnants of their army flee back through the portals in a panic. Robot later calculates the reason. The Flaxans experience time differently, and in Earth's reality, it moves many times faster for them. Simply put, they aged to death right there on the battlefield. Mark, having seen the elderly woman to the doctors, returns to his comatose father and admits he did everything in his power, but feels completely helpless. The next day, Mark shows up at school looking half destroyed and tries to act like everything is fine. He tells his classmates he just got into a bad fight, omitting the alien invasion and the hundreds of people he saved. In the hallway, he spots Eve Wilkins and realizes from her look that she's the very Adam Eve he fought side by side with. He approaches her, thanks her for the help and for essentially saving his life with her intervention during the Flaxan battle. Eve fairly quickly figures out that the inexperienced hero in the yellow costume is Mark. They add each other on social media and call that evening to talk through yesterday's chaos and the team's operations in general. Mark hears for the first time how young heroes perceive their responsibilities and understands that for him, this is no longer just playing superhero, it's real accountability. Eve invites him to stop by the team's headquarters to get to know the group better and decide if he wants to join. Meanwhile, at the former Guardians headquarters, Cecil is dealing with the fallout of the team's murders. Technical staff report that shortly before the massacre, someone disabled the surveillance and recording systems, leaving gaps in the data for exactly the minutes when the killings occurred. Cecil clears everyone out of the room and summons his unconventional consultant, a demon detective named Damien Darkblood, better known as Darkblood. This entity literally extracts memories from blood and crime scene traces. Touching the dried stains, he sees fragments of the battle in a matter of seconds and understands far more than the entire team of analysts had managed in several days. Darkblood hints to Cecil that he doesn't buy the unknown enemy theory, and suspicion begins to turn toward Omni-Man. Cecil, being a pragmatist, isn't rushing to officially accuse the planet's most powerful hero. If it all checks out, he won't just have to expose the truth to the world, he'll also have to somehow stop Nolan. Mark, meanwhile, comes with Eve to the team's headquarters. There, he meets the rest of the crew. Rex, who instantly shows his personality by cracking edgy jokes. Duplicate, who can pack a room full of her own copies. And the cold, rational Robot, who fills the role of leader and tactician. It turns out Eve is dating Rex, which adds a layer of awkwardness to the atmosphere. Robot explains that following the Flaxan attack, he built an early warning system, so now the team will get advance notice of new invasions. He also passes along Cecil's request. With the Guardians sidelined, the team needs to pick up part of their responsibilities, and Invincible, if he agrees, can strengthen the roster. Mark, inspired by the idea of being part of a team, agrees without much hesitation. Later, he tells his father that he'll now be working not just alone, but alongside the young heroes. Nolan reacts with wariness. He's clearly not thrilled that his son is getting deeper into superhero work, and doing so under someone else's command. Before long, Robot's new sensor goes off. The Flaxans are breaking through to Earth again, and this time, they've adapted to the local time flow and can handle Earth's chronology just fine. The team flies out to meet the threat. On the battlefield, the enemy has already prepared. There's a near-personalized countermeasure for each hero. Robot is knocked out with an electromagnetic pulse. Rex is attacked with his own type of energy. Duplicate is taken down with heavy weaponry, and Mark gets coated in a mixture that hardens like concrete. The Flaxan leader is about to finish off Adam Eve when Invincible, enraged and running on pure adrenaline, bursts free from his restraints, displaying a surge of power no one has seen from him before. He beats the leader half to death and accidentally snaps his bracelet. Robot notices that those devices are exactly how the aliens stabilize their time and quickly devises a plan. Using a shockwave, he knocks out all the bracelets simultaneously. The Flaxans begin rapidly aging again and are forced to flee before they die on the spot. After the fight, Rex, who had previously treated Mark with condescension, is forced to acknowledge his strength and standing on the team. Mark, meanwhile, learns that Omni-Man has regained consciousness and will be discharged to come home. Back home, Nolan acts as though nothing unusual has happened. He returns to training with Mark, showing him how to handle different types of enemies. During this time, Cecil and Darkblood continue the investigation, and the demon grows more vocal about his conviction that it was Omni-Man who destroyed the Guardians. Cecil, however, orders him to keep quiet. If the rumors spread beyond a tight inner circle, the consequences will be catastrophic. Darkblood goes further and shows up personally at the Grayson home to speak with Debbie. He carefully nudges her toward the idea that the story of the attack on the Guardians' headquarters has too many loose ends. Debbie, who has already been noticing strange things about her husband's behavior, grows even more doubtful about everything he says. Nolan, at this point, also senses the noose tightening around him. He notices surveillance, feels he's being watched, and warns the demon to stay away from his family. Separately, a new Guardian storyline begins to develop. Following the deaths of the old team, Robot is officially offered leadership of the reformed roster. He organizes a selection process, subjecting candidates to combat trials. Among the applicants is Monster Girl, a woman who looks like a teenager on the outside, but is actually an adult. Each transformation into her monstrous form rolls her age back a little further. During the fights, she easily takes Rex down. He tried to make an impression, but his jokes only irritated her. To prevent things from getting unnecessarily brutal, Mark steps in, and as a result, several new heroes make the team. The very first meeting, however, makes it clear that cohesion is nowhere to be found. Nobody likes the imposed training schedule. Everyone pulls in different directions, and the squad looks more like a gathering of talented loners than a coordinated combat unit. On the personal front, things aren't going smoothly for Mark either. His best friend helps him get closer to Amber by feeding him information about her interests and habits. Even so, the key role is still played by Mark's own directness. He's honest, awkward, sometimes late, but he doesn't try to perform as the perfect guy. They start studying for exams together, spending time after school, and between them, something gradually develops. Not just a crush, but real trust. One of those evenings, while Amber steps out to the bathroom, Mark is unexpectedly intercepted by Cecil. He literally yanks the hero out of his personal life and explains that a powerful villain has appeared at Mount Rushmore, and Omni-Man is currently busy with another threat. Cecil asks for help from Mark and Adam Eve because he doesn't consider the new Guardians reliable enough for missions of this level. Mark, without getting a chance to properly explain anything to Amber, is forced to drop everything and fly off. Mark and Eve fly to Mount Rushmore and discover that the source of the threat is Dr. Seismic, a scientist with radical views, armed with wrist-mounted earthquake generators. He declares that humanity is destroying the planet itself, and therefore it must be rebooted, and proceeds to bring the mountain slopes crashing down, creating a genuine seismic storm. Mark charges him head-on, while Eve tries to stabilize the avalanches, reinforcing rock and generating platforms from the air. The Doctor drives the ground all the way down to the lava, threatening to turn the surrounding area into a regional-scale catastrophe. In the end, through combined effort, the heroes force him into the molten abyss, after which the seismic activity dies down. The villain is officially considered dead, though the viewer understands that in stories like these, deaths like that are rarely final. Mark, physically and mentally drained, rushes home, hoping Amber hasn't already left. She's naturally unhappy about his disappearance, but agrees to keep things going, giving him one more chance. In parallel, Omni-Man battles a giant kaiju monster, which is eventually neutralized with great difficulty. Cecil orders that the body not be destroyed outright, but preserved for the future as a potential asset. Eve, returning to the teen team's base, runs into Rex, who tries to apologize for his behavior and infidelity, hoping to win back the relationship. But after seeing how he conducts himself both on the team and in his personal life, Eve definitively refuses to start over and walks away. Elsewhere, deep in a maximum security prison, the Mahler twins are still at work. One of them is building a plan to escape using their knowledge and resources. Their breakout unexpectedly gets outside assistance. Robot, who on one hand leads the new Guardians, and on the other is running his own hidden agenda, helps arrange ideal conditions for them to escape. One of the twins sacrifices himself so the other can get out. It becomes clear to the viewer, Robot has an interest in their genius minds and their ability to work with biomaterial, and it's obviously not for noble purposes. Meanwhile, Debbie's suspicions about Nolan continue to grow. After her conversation with Darkblood, she can no longer simply brush aside the inconsistencies. She finds the demon's old notebook, studies his notes, and realizes that far too much evidence points to a connection between Omni-Man's suit and the deaths of the Guardians. While Mark is off on a date and studying, Debbie secretly takes her husband's suit to Art, the same tailor who makes superhero costumes. He runs an analysis and, a short while later, confirms with horror Nolan's suit bears traces of blood and damage that clearly belong to the Guardians. And, from the nature of the wounds, it's evident that Omni-Man was the attacking party. For Debbie, this is the moment when the illusion of the perfect hero shatters completely. She understands that her husband isn't just hiding something, he most likely deliberately murdered his own allies. Even so, she doesn't rush to share this with Mark or anyone else. First, she needs to survive this blow on her own. Cecil, for his part, realizes that Darkblood has gone too far in the investigation and is about to start acting openly. To prevent the demon from provoking an uncontrollable conflict, he performs a special ritual and effectively banishes Darkblood back to his infernal dimension, temporarily removing him from the board. This doesn't solve the Omni-Man problem, but it buys the agency time to prepare. Around the same time, Robot moves the new Guardians to the old team's base. Cecil leaves a bloodstain from the fallen heroes on the wall as a grim reminder. Legends died here, and the newcomers have no right to approach the mission carelessly. Personal conflicts continue to simmer within the team, but Robot, outwardly cold and impassive, patiently arranges them as pieces in his broader scheme. The next major story block revolves around a mission to Mars. Cecil informs the Graysons that NASA is sending an expedition to the Red Planet and initially wants to assign the escort duty to Omni-Man. But Nolan declines, arguing that Earth needs him here and that minor space assignments can go to someone else. Mark, wanting to prove his worth and feel like a real hero, volunteers to accompany the ship himself. His job? Follow the craft discreetly, protect the astronauts, and make sure everything goes smoothly. Before launch, he shares the news with Eve, gets a couple of her tips on the situation with Amber, swings by Amber herself, covers it with a story about a 2-week volunteer trip, gives her a gift, and promises to come back. After that, he heads into space and, in invisible escort mode, trails the spacecraft all the way to Mars. After landing on Mars, the astronauts get to work on their mission, while Mark tries to stay in the background and avoid drawing attention, observing them from a distance. At some point, he actually falls asleep from exhaustion, and when he wakes up, the cosmonauts are gone. On the surface, there are only footprints leading to underground tunnels. Mark descends and discovers an entire world of Martians, the planet's native inhabitants, who live in hiding and regard humans as a potential threat. Their ruler explains that the planet harbors a race of parasites, the Sequids, who, once they enter a human mind, turn the host into part of a collective superorganism. For Martians, they're less dangerous, but if the Sequids take even one human, humanity could eventually become a faceless army. That is why the Martians want to eliminate the expedition. Mark can't agree to killing humans, and, pulling off feats of improvisation and ingenuity, organizes the astronauts' escape back to the spacecraft. In the chaos, he does make one mistake. One of the expedition members turns out to have been replaced by a Martian, while the real person remains behind among the locals. The ship departs, and with it, a disguised alien returns to Earth, laying the groundwork for future problems. When Mark returns home, he finds his parents trying to play the role of a normal family, but the tension is already thick in the air. He heads over to Amber, gives her a souvenir from Mars, and tries to make up for his sudden disappearance. Meanwhile, Cecil, having wrapped up the Mars mission phase, takes an important step. Publicly and officially, he continues to portray Omni-Man as a hero, but inside the system, he begins building a line of defense in case Nolan turns out to be an enemy. Robot, meanwhile, continues his plan with the twins. With their help, he's preparing a new human body for himself, using stolen biomaterial and Rex's blood to form the ideal vessel for transferring his own consciousness. The whole thing plays out like a parallel, almost cyberpunk storyline in which an artificial intelligence strives to acquire flesh. In Mark and Amber's relationship, a crisis is brewing. Constant lateness, disappearances, and half-truths are eroding trust. Mark is torn between wanting to be the perfect hero and a normal guy, but hasn't yet figured out how to combine those roles. And it's on this fault line that the season begins to build toward its central conflict, the conversation between father and son that will tear the whole world into a before and after. Meanwhile, another story is gaining momentum in the city, the Titan storyline. This stone-skinned bruiser works for a crime boss known as Machine Head, working off an old debt. He shakes people down, destroys rival businesses, and protects his boss's interests, even though he's long despised the life he's trapped himself in. We see Titan coming home after another dirty job and talking with his daughter. In these brief scenes, it becomes clear he's no monster. He's a father who wants to pull his child out of poverty and crime. Seeing Invincible in the news, Titan realizes if he plays his cards right, the hero could be the lever that finally lets him topple his boss. To get Mark's attention, he spells out the hero's alias in lights on a rooftop. Mark, spotting this signal, flies to the scene and comes face to face with Titan. Instead of a fight, Titan proposes a deal. Help take down the criminal king who keeps entire neighborhoods living in fear. And in return, the city will become at least a little cleaner, and ordinary people a little freer. Mark's reaction is mixed. On one hand, he's used to seeing criminals as targets, not partners. On the other, Titan shows him the real picture. Houses burned down for insurance money, setups, a whole neighborhood's dependence on a boss who runs illegal operations and doesn't shy away from civilian casualties. The conversation with Titan touches something important in Mark. For the first time, he's confronted with a gray zone, where a villain can say things that actually make sense. Mark promises to think it over and returns home thoroughly confused. At dinner, he brings the topic up with his parents. His father is unequivocal. Working with criminals is a path to disaster, and criminals always use heroes for their own ends. He says this sharply, bluntly, leaving no room for doubt. His mother, however, sees things differently. After everything that's happened recently, she herself can no longer fully trust Nolan, and she sees that Mark genuinely wants to help ordinary people. She doesn't give him a direct blessing, but suggests he decide for himself after weighing the risks. Internally, she already knows at this moment that her husband is hiding a monstrous truth, and that's partly why her words come out softer. Mark wrestles with the decision until morning, but recalling the neighborhood he saw with Titan and his father's reaction, he ultimately chooses. He's going to help the stone-skinned man break free from his boss's grip and take some of the city's criminal pressure off at the same time. At school, the personal drama continues in parallel. Eve reports that she's left home and is trying to find her own path outside the team and outside her relationship with Rex. Amber reminds Mark that they agreed to volunteer at a shelter and asks him, this time, not to be late. Eve, noticing the tension between them, tells Amber in a private conversation that Mark really is trying and isn't ignoring her on purpose. He just keeps vanishing for important reasons he can't talk about. It's a kind of soft cover for her friend. But Mark ultimately chooses the criminal operation with Titan over the shelter anyway. They carefully plan the raid on Machine Head's lair. Titan will temporarily neutralize the boss's teleporting assistant to strip him of that key advantage, while Invincible is supposed to take on the main firepower. The plan works only halfway. Titan and Mark burst in on the boss, but it quickly becomes clear he's been preparing for exactly this scenario for a long time. A chip in his head has boosted his intelligence to an extraordinary level. He's calculated a multitude of scenarios and prepared a backup plan. The teleporter they failed to contain enters the picture, bringing with him an entire squad of mercenaries with varied abilities. A brutal fight breaks out, in which Mark takes serious wounds. He is literally torn, broken, and hurled across the room. The new Guardians arrive to help, but they're met with equally little respect. The immortal opossum, a creature of colossal strength, nearly kills both Mark and Monster Girl and Samson. At a certain point, the creature simply gets bored of unworthy opponents and leaves the battlefield. On a second wind, the team finally finishes off the mercenaries and neutralizes the boss. But the physical cost to the heroes is enormous. Mark is a bag of broken bones, Samson is nearly dead, and Monster Girl loses her strength and barely regains consciousness. While medics and technicians are pulling the heroes back from the brink, an important detail surfaces. The teleporting assistant was working for Titan all along, and everything that happened was part of his plan. In the end, it's Titan himself who takes the former boss's seat, becoming the neighborhood's new kingpin. He promises he'll use power differently, that he'll bring order and remove open brutality, but in practice, he simply repaints the criminal pyramid with his own colors. Mark, barely conscious, feels a bitter realization. He didn't help tear down the system, only swap out the person at the top. Meanwhile, Cecil seizes the moment and takes a blood sample from Mark. The specimens are needed to understand how Viltrumite cells work and what sets Omni-Man apart from ordinary humans. Eve, getting word of Mark's condition, flies to the hospital and becomes a kind of moral buffer for him. She explains that she told Amber he got hit by a bus, covering for his absence at the charity event. Thanks to that, Amber doesn't end the relationship outright, but the crack in trust runs a little deeper. Mark blames himself for pulling his friends into a life-threatening operation and nearly getting several of them killed. Robot, observing the aftermath, grows increasingly close to Monster Girl, showing unexpected sensitivity and care. Samson, who spends some time hovering between life and death, experiences a strange surge. After a powerful electric shock, his body seems to reboot, and a portion of the strength he'd long since lost comes flooding back. In parallel, the twins fulfill Robot's commission. They build him a new body. Using advanced biotechnology and Rex's blood, they grow a young human body with enhanced physical parameters. Robot plans to transfer his consciousness into it, to stop being merely a mechanical observer and experience real life. The twins naturally try to embed their own hidden control mechanisms into the construct, but Robot anticipates this move and builds in countermeasures in advance. When the consciousness transfer succeeds, Robot, in his new body, effectively a teenage version of Rex, but with a different personality and the experience of an artificial intelligence, announces the deal is done, and, per the plan, has the twins returned to custody. They of course don't intend to surrender quietly, and an impressive escape and capture sequence plays out between them and the security systems. In the end, the twins wind up back in custody, but the viewer understands perfectly well. Talent like theirs won't be held by a prison for long. After analyzing Omni-Man's suit, Art confirms to Debbie without any hesitation the blood traces and damage belong to the Guardians. And from the nature of the strikes, it's evident that Nolan was the attacker. For her, this is a point of no return. She goes home already knowing the truth, but but with no idea how to live with it. When Nolan arrives, a heavy conversation begins. Debbie asks him directly what happened at the Guardians' headquarters. Nolan first tries to dodge, repeating the outside attack story, but she corners him with facts: the suit, the blood, the matching wounds. At a certain point, he stops performing and acknowledges that he did what he did, without any attempt to justify himself. He asks her to simply trust him, promises to explain everything later, insists he had a reason, but for Debbie, that's no longer enough. The person she's lived with for years turns out to be the cold-blooded murderer of his own allies. She kicks him out of the house and tries to reach Mark to warn him, but his phone is smashed from the recent battles. Cecil, meanwhile, finishes his preparations. He no longer entertains illusions and internally acknowledges within the agency, Omni-Man isn't just a potential threat, he's an active one. Debbie is brought to a secure facility where Cecil reveals what he's been hiding for so long. He knew about Nolan's involvement in the Guardians' deaths, but was buying time, trying to understand his motives and find ways to stop him if the situation got out of hand. Now that the hero's own wife knows the truth, the decision is made. They have to prepare for direct confrontation. Nolan, meanwhile, returns home and finds surveillance agents there. He eliminates them without hesitation, both inside the house and in the adjacent building that housed the listening post. Donald, Cecil's right hand, blows himself up along with the building in an attempt to at least delay Omni-Man. It doesn't kill Nolan, but it shows just how far Cecil is willing to go in sacrifices. Omni-Man, realizing he's now openly regarded as an enemy, flies out to find Mark. While Nolan deals with the surveillance team, Mark returns from a university trip with William and Amber. Amber has finally had enough of Mark's constant disappearances and lies, and is practically ready to call it quits. At a certain point, realizing he's losing her, Mark pulls off his mask and openly admits that he is invincible. Amber's reaction isn't what he expected. She says she'd suspected for a long time. But the problem isn't that he's a hero, it's that he simply doesn't know how to be honest or give advance warning. She decides to break up anyway, at least for now, to process everything that's happened. William, unlike her, is genuinely stunned by the confirmation of his suspicions, but accepts the new information fairly quickly and stays on his friend's side. Cecil tries to buy time. He teleports directly to Nolan in mid-air in order to delay him with conversation and keep him from reaching Mark quickly. A brief exchange takes place between them, making clear that Cecil sees Nolan not as an ally, but as a ticking time bomb. And now, he's unleashing every available reserve. While they trade words, Cecil sequentially deploys all the resources he's prepared against Omni-Man. First, 3 upgraded cyborgs built on Sinclair's technology. They launch their attack and even manage to hold Nolan off for a while, landing real damage. But against a genuine Viltrumite, it isn't nearly enough. He tears them apart. The next card, the very kaiju Nolan once fought before. The GDA has juiced the monster up with stimulants, making it tougher and more aggressive. The kaiju literally looms over the city, hurling buildings aside, and forces Nolan into a punishing fight. This finally gives Cecil the extra minutes he needs to warn Mark, explain the scope of what's happened, and direct him toward the place where the main conflict is unfolding. Mark, still processing the breakup with Amber and the rough trip, gets in touch with Eve and learns that a satellite strike has been launched against Nolan, and something strange is going on in the city. He flies to the scene, where Omni-Man is already locked in battle with the kaiju, barely containing the monster. When Mark joins the fight, they manage to bring the creature down together. But at that moment, the Immortal enters the picture. Revived earlier by the twins, he remembers how Omni-Man killed him and the entire team, and now, laying eyes on Nolan, he unleashes the full force of his fury. The Immortal screams on live television that Omni-Man is a murderer, and attacks without giving him a single second to offer an explanation. The scene is broadcast worldwide. News cameras and drones capture 2 superhumans fighting in the sky. Nolan ends up tearing the Immortal in half once again, this time right in front of Mark and billions of viewers. For the Son, it's a shock. He witnesses not only the killing of a teammate, but the cold, absolute certainty with which his father does it. After the Immortal's death, the air goes still. Mark, hovering in the sky opposite his father, demands an explanation. He wants to believe someone is controlling Nolan, that it's someone's manipulation or mind control. Nolan, understanding there's no point in hiding anything anymore, openly tells his son for the first time who the Viltrumites really are and what the true purpose of his mission has been. He explains that Viltrum isn't simply a civilization of noble protectors. It's an empire built on a selection of the strongest. The weak were simply exterminated long ago, leaving only the elite. By the time he came of age, Viltrumites were already the dominant race and had decided not merely to help other worlds, but to subjugate them. The conquest plan wasn't built on a single mass invasion, but on slow, systematic domination. Their finest officers were sent to different planets to embed themselves as protectors, earn trust, and then prepare the groundwork for annexation into the Empire. Earth is exactly such a target, and Nolan was assigned as its curator. Mark, hearing all of this, is horrified. For him, Earth is home, friends, his mother, the girl he loves, every small and large moment of his life. For Nolan, by his own account, it's simply a civilization that needs to be elevated, even if millions of lives must be erased to accomplish it. He tells his son that for a Viltrumite, human life is too short to carry real weight, and that within a few hundred years, none of Mark's current acquaintances will likely still be around. There is the cynicism of the immortal in his logic. He offers his son a long perspective, urges him to shed sentimentality and stand with the strong. Mark refuses. He says he can't look at people as expendable. He knows their weaknesses all too well, but he also knows their worth. He rejects the brevity of life argument. On the contrary, it's precisely because time is limited that it has meaning. Nolan, seeing that persuasion isn't working, shifts to threats and states plainly, if Mark stands in the Empire's way, he will be an enemy. What follows is one of the season's most brutal battles, the fight between father and son. At first, Nolan is in teaching mode. He hits hard, but seems to hold something in reserve, hoping Mark will break mentally. He throws his son into buildings, drives him through skyscrapers, demonstrating just how enormous the gap is in experience and raw power. Mark tries to contain the destruction, redirecting blows away from people where he can, but it's nearly impossible. At a certain point, Nolan literally uses his son as a battering ram. Flying with him through a subway train, he demonstratively shows how easily human bodies become bloodstains when they collide with Viltrumite flesh. It's a scene in which Nolan poses a question, not with words, but with actions. Do you still want to die for them? Despite the brutality of what's happening, Mark doesn't back down. He doesn't so much win as simply refuse to break, getting up every time his father throws him into another city, mountain, or building. They end up in Chicago, and there the destruction reaches its peak. Entire city blocks are reduced to rubble. Thousands of people die from the direct and indirect consequences of their fight. Nolan beats his son to a bloody mask, knocks out teeth, breaks bones, all while shouting that Mark is wasting a potentially infinite life on insignificant creatures. At a certain moment, looking at his battered but still unbroken son, Nolan begins to remember what Mark was like as a child. First steps, first games, family moments he once considered a waste of time. Those memories layer on top of the current image. A beaten kid who, through everything, still sees not a monster when he looks at him, but his father. When Nolan once again demands to know what Mark will have left in 500 years if he turns his back on the Empire, the son barely manages to get out. I'll still have you. That simple phrase penetrates the armor of Viltrumite pragmatism more deeply than any punch could. Nolan realizes that, no matter how much he's convinced himself the family was just cover for the mission, over the years of living on Earth, he truly became attached to Debbie and Mark. He's torn between his duty to the Empire and what he actually feels, but in the end, he cannot bring himself to finish off his own son. With tears in his eyes, unable to continue either the fight or the conversation, he flies away. Not just from Earth, but out of the entire star system. Cecil registers that Omni-Man has left the solar system and isn't returning. The world is left in shock. The planet's greatest hero has transformed before everyone's eyes into its greatest threat, and then vanished into space. Mark, barely alive, is retrieved by emergency services. He is treated at a classified facility while the new Guardians dig through the rubble of the aftermath, save survivors, and help pull people out from under debris. The old team's blood is finally washed off the walls of the original headquarters, a symbol that the young heroes have become a full-fledged fighting unit and now truly carry responsibility for the planet. Cecil visits Mark and tells him plainly, he did the impossible. Not a victory, but he stopped someone no one else could have even slowed down. He offers Mark his father's place as Earth's primary protector, but Mark isn't ready yet to take on that kind of status. After his discharge, Mark comes home to Debbie. She's broken, but alive. And between them, a quiet, very human conversation unfolds. No theatrics. They've both lost a husband and a father, but they still have each other. Amber, having heard everything that happened, comes to Mark as well. She understands the magnitude of what he's been through and gently makes clear she's willing to give them one more chance, if he learns to be honest with her. Eve offers Mark the chance to continue his hero work in whatever format feels right to him, alone, with a team, as part of the Guardians, or otherwise. The season's final scenes show Mark suspended in the sky above Earth, looking at the planet with different eyes than before. His life has been shattered and simultaneously simultaneously rebuilt. The old illusions are gone, but in their place is the understanding that he is now not just a guy in a costume. He is the only Viltrumite on Earth who chose people over empire. Somewhere far away in space, Omni-Man flies on, and the only question that remains is whether he will ever return, and if he does, on whose side his son will stand.